Good evening. This is the October 18th special meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see an audience this evening. So first item of business, it's going to be a relatively short meeting. Got a couple good discussion items at the end, but we'll proceed here. First item is approval of the minutes, September 27th. Do we have any additions, deletions, corrections? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, so,
Second.
and Joel second. So Cole, we'll start with you for approval.
Aye.
Joel, aye.
Aye.
And
Aye.
Rich, aye. Okay. Next,
Victoria.
I'm sorry. Oh, Victoria. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. You look so different sitting down there. Next item is public comment period, a 15-minute time to welcome anybody from the audience that would like to come up and speak with us on a matter that isn't before the City Council or the Planning and Zoning this evening. So would anybody care to come up? No. Okay. Thank you. Well, we appreciate you joining us anyway. Next item is approval of the reason statement of relevant criteria and standards. Did we have any corrections or additions on that? Okay, so if not, we could take a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
So Cole's motion and a second.
Second.
And Joel's second. So we'll start, Victoria, we'll start with you.
Okay, aye.
And Rich? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And
Aye.
aye. Okay, approved. All right, that is our big action item. You're up, Joel, for Transportation Commission.
That's also easy because the meeting last week of the Transportation Committee was canceled. So I have no report on that.
Okay, well, that was easy. This is going to be maybe even a record. I do have a couple of items and then we can talk about schedule. Mike, at the risk of beating a dead horse, an RCS discussion. I was looking back to past presentations, and we always have a section in the presentation that states the relevant criteria and standards, not as detailed as in this document, but am I incorrect thinking that if the proposal or the application didn't meet relevant criteria and standards, it wouldn't get approved?
Correct.
And if it's not approved, absent that, the RCS is moot. If it is approved, we've already said that it met the relevant criteria and standards. And what I'm getting at is back to the discussion of why can't we approve them at the end of, rather than coming back solely at the next meeting to approve, why couldn't we revisit approving it at the end of a public hearing if appropriate? I know there's a concern that we don't want it to appear that we've made up our mind, but we wouldn't even be considering it if it didn't meet relevant criteria and standards. So I'm just trying to reconcile this a little bit and see if we couldn't rethink the possibility.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly could revisit that. I mean, that would take just staff drafting the RCS prior to the pack, putting it in essentially the packet for the hearing that night. But yeah, it's always the concern that maybe the decision's been made in the public's view if the document for, say, approval is already drafted. So that's always been kind of the concern on our end.
Right. Would you have enough information coming into the public hearing to prepare this kind of a detailed RCS?
Typically, yeah. I mean, a lot of the findings of fact in the very beginning of the document, I guess the relevant facts and conclusions, a lot of that comes from the staff report. So that's the basis of that. And then really it's just the RCS at the very end, just depending upon what the land use action is. And a lot of them are similar, just case by case basis.
He did one
and we decided to add one or two conditions that he wouldn't have known about, then it would have to come
Back to us, yeah.
But thing is, I suppose occasionally, twice a year or so, we get something that's really critical and involved. And then you don't want to make up your mind before if the discussion, when we have a interested
Right.
group of citizens. And so often, especially when we're maybe just changing something in the code, only 3 out of 100 citizens ever read the code anyway. So I mean, because the code is kind of there when you need it, but not there for just fun reading. And so I don't know. You can see that it could. I think typically we would know if there's a project that's really critical. We can almost predict when we're going to get 50 people in the audience, just the kinds of large movements in the city. We tend to know that. If Walmart's coming to town and wants 100 acres, we know it's going to be something that we'd want to discuss. When somebody's doing a 2-acre split, no one cares. So I don't know if that relates to.
Well, no, it kind of does. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions, and I wouldn't mind Mia's read on how she would feel about something like that. I don't know. I just, and I know Cody had mentioned that I guess Boise does the RCS at the same time.
I think you mentioned that they draft their RCS to be included in the packet. So I could certainly revisit that.
Well, and I'm sensitive to the appearance, and we don't want. So that would be the real issue in my mind.
Say it's more than appearance because we have had public hearings that have gone in different ways than what is anticipated, and has gotten in. We always put conditions that might not have been anticipated.
Right, which is Nell's point. Yeah, and well, I guess
I would be concerned about that.
maybe it's kind of on a as appropriate basis.
Mhm.
So, for example, in this case, it could be done with probably little controversy, but if we do add, then if we've added conditions.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, like I said, I don't mean to beat a dead horse because I know we've kind of talked about this before, but I wouldn't mind kind of, and your point is well taken, Joel. But let's get not only a read from Mia, but when we meet with council, they could kind of weigh in on whether they think that's appropriate or not.
Okay.
So, but a nice segue. And Mike, this is kind of an education piece for me mostly. There was an interesting letter in the paper some weeks ago on the Home Depot issue, and two pieces of it come to my mind. One is that we don't need to do a rezone on that given its current zoning, and I wanted to confirm that was true. But there was a suggestion that in a case like this, a CUP might be an appropriate thing, and what actions would we have to take, if any, if we were to go or consider going that route?
Yeah, the property is already zoned motor business, so the university rezoned that a number of years ago. I believe that large retail establishments, so this is when Super Walmart was planning on coming to town, 2006, 2007-ish, instituted a moratorium on large retail establishments, so the big box stores, and ended up developing an ordinance that contained a design manual, so design guidelines. And I believe at the time it required a conditional use permit, and that was subsequently amended by a council probably 2011 timeframe. And so I believe there was some type of component where a conditional use permit was required for new large retail establishments or expansions to existing ones that exceeded a certain square footage. But really, conditional use permits, they're typically perceived as an allowed use, but just because of additional impacts to maybe the surrounding neighborhood, there's an additional eye and maybe conditions that are placed upon a permit through the public hearing process. Really, when you develop a design manual that has all these guidelines that they need to meet, that's really the intent of the design manual, is to have these uses fit in with the surrounding area.
Okay.
And so, I think that was why the perception at the time, that's why the conditional use permit was removed
Okay.
as far as a requirement, because we have a design manual that's a number of pages long that talks about site, building aesthetics, architectural design, transit access, pedestrian, bicycle access, things like that.
So if, and I don't know how big an if it is, but if Home Depot were to come in, that issue would not come before planning and.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was a conditional use permit, it wouldn't come
Go
before
to
the commission, it'd be the
Adjustment.
Board of Adjustment. But yeah, my understanding is that they're moving forward. In the large retail establishment ordinance, there's a requirement that a neighborhood or a community meeting be held by the applicant. And so I believe that's November 3rd. Is what I had read in the paper, is when they're planning on conducting that community meeting. And so that's a prerequisite for submitting plans to our department. And then we essentially would, once we receive the plans and the neighborhood meeting minutes and all the required submittals from the community meeting, then we would review it based upon the design manual,
Okay.
whether it complies or not.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. I mean, it raised an interesting issue in my mind. So I guess we'll see what comes from that. So another just kind of FYI, there was a good article in the paper today. Tyler was in there about the PBAC and the new strategy for water. So I just mention it because it's an interesting thing to read, and I guess it's a moving target, even though a preference has been selected. But I think that it's worth reading, and it brought to mind that I'm anxious to continue our discussions on water issues.
This was in the Daily News.
Daily News, yeah, it was today, wasn't it? Or yesterday?
I think it might have been yesterday, but he was at council the other night too, if you wanted to watch it instead of read it.
Dig that out.
So Rob,
Yes, Victoria. Yes.
I listened to Tyler's report from city council, and every time he does one of these, there's always something that he clarifies or something new that comes up. So it's always good to go back, and if you didn't hear it, but it's always good to hear these because you do get a good update and something else gets clearer than what it wasn't before. So.
Great, thank you. And I don't know, given our schedule, if we'd be able to do something with him before the end of the year. If not, maybe sometime after the first of the year. Let's.
I think the last discussion was me reaching out to the new executive director of PBAC.
Right.
Maybe. So I've been gone the last week and a half, so I haven't been able to make
Yeah,
that contact. But
That's fine. Well, we've only got a few meetings left before the year's over. So in fact, what does the November, December schedule look like? I know I can't get my head around the fact that we're almost at the end of the year already, but I think November 8th would be our next meeting. The 22nd, which is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I would assume that we probably
yeah,
would
we
try to.
typically cancel that. I guess the question is whether or not we shift the 8th back a week like we did this month. We have a number of applications that I think are on the cusp of being submitted, and it would just be the timing of those. But as of right now, we don't have anything planned for the 8th.
That's certainly, let me look at the calendar. That sounds like a good idea. So that we would move that to the 15th then?
That's what we were thinking. Yeah, if we
How
received.
does everybody feel about that? Does that seem like
I think that's okay.
okay, why don't we proceed doing that. That way, I mean, we probably were only going to have one meeting in November anyway, but that would
Yeah.
kind of delay it so that if there were any applications that were coming forward. And then December would be the 13th, and I doubt if we would want to do anything on the 27th.
Yep.
So we'll kind of reset that. But okay, so let's move forward to doing something on the 15th of November then. And so the other thing, speaking of schedules, and I don't know that it's anything critical, but I am going to be gone for the entirety of January. That doesn't mean we don't have any meetings, but I won't be here. So, and that's also into the election season. I don't mean council election, but so we can kind of maybe in December, we'll talk a little bit more about where we want to head with that. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'll be gone. So anything else for the good of the order? I know this is an incredibly short meeting, but I tried to drag it out as long as I could. Victoria, anything from you?
Nope.
Okay, Rich, Nels, Joel, Cole. Okay, well, anything else from Mike, from you, Gina,
No, sir.
Jennifer? Okay, all right. With that, we will call the meeting adjourned. Oh.